Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Missable Macbeth Moments. Today we'll be talking about what equivocator means and what it means to equivocate, and why was that such a bad thing? During this series, Missable Macbeth Moments, I try to discuss and analyse small moments from the play that actually hold large significance once you go back and read them again. I'll also be linking to wider themes and concepts, and we'll be making links between different scenes in the play, as this is a crucial part of the mark scheme. So, I want you to think to Act 2, Scene 3, which is the scene straight after Duncan is murdered, but before they find his body. At the start of the scene, the porter is joking about being the porter of Hellgate, and he's joking about all of the criminals that he's letting in through his gates, or the ones that he's not letting in through the gates. During the scene, the porter is drunk, and the audience are meant to use him as kind of comic relief during this play. But some things that he says could be taken more seriously, and if you read between the lines, they actually hold really quite large significance. He says, "Knock, knock, who's there? In the other devil's name. Faith, here's an equivocator that could swear in both the scales against either scale, who committed treason enough for God's sake, yet could not equivocate to heaven. Oh, come in, equivocator. Knock, knock, knock." So here he's saying that there's someone knocking at his hell gate, and that person is an equivocator, someone that's actually committed treason. To equivocate means to say one thing but mean another, or to omit, which means leave out, key information. This is a type of lying. I'll be explaining later in the video about the context of this and why people during this era, the Jacobean era, would be all too familiar with the word equivocate. So on the first reading of this play, you may well think to yourself, okay, so there's a liar who wants to get into hell gates. He's committed treason. He's definitely not going to get into heaven, therefore. Treason was, of course, a mortal sin. But he may well be let into hell. And you just think, okay. But actually, if you go back and you think about this again, then the equivocator could be seen to be Macbeth. He is a liar. He is about to be leaving out some key information during this scene. For example, when Macduff finds the body, him and Lady Macbeth have to go out there and pretend that they know nothing about the murder of Duncan. And of course, they act ignorant. They accuse the two guards, and Macbeth even kills the two guards. And therefore, we as the audience could have some dramatic irony here, that we understand that that equivocator could be Macbeth. And it could also be foreshadowing the fact that he himself will be entering Hell's Gates at the end of this play when he is killed. There's also an anaphoric link back to the previous scene. There is a motif of knocking across this play, and in the previous scene, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth hear knocking when they're washing their hands. It's left ambiguous if there is actually knocking or if they're hearing that for themselves. It could be an early sign of their guilty conscience playing on them. But this repetition of knocking would have an effect on the audience, and it's another kind of link in our brains back to Macbeth. So when the porter is saying knock knock, it could make us think of the previous scene where Macbeth was involved with that knocking. There is, of course, another reference to equivocation later in the play. In Act 5, Scene 5, Macbeth finally realises that the witch's prophecies perhaps weren't as true as he first believed them to be. He gets told that the wood is moving towards Dunsinane Hill and towards his castle, and he realises that he was probably only told half a truth. The quote is, "I begin to doubt the equivocation of the fiend that lies like truth." A fiend here would mean a villain, and the villain that he's accusing of equivocation, of half lying, is the witches. And of course we know that's true as well. Later on in the play, we also find out the half-truth that they told him, that he can't be killed of anyone that's born of woman. And then we have the loophole, of course, that Macduff was born by caesarean section, which in my book still means that you're born from a woman, but there we go. And so in this scene, he uses that word equivocation again to talk about someone that is telling half a truth. Really important, I think, and it's another kind of anaphoric link back to the equivocation mentioned in Act 2, Scene 3 with the porter. So why is Shakespeare making multiple references to equivocation in this play? Well, as we know, or hopefully know, this play was written very shortly after the Gunpowder Plot in 1605, and a lot of the kind of themes and messages of this play are very closely linked to that. So if you're not confident with the facts about the Gunpowder Plot, I would recommend that you go and revise that context. But in a nutshell, there was a man called Henry Garnet, who was a Catholic. He was a Jesuit Catholic. And at the time, Jesuit Catholics had this practice called equivocation, where they lied whilst they were under oath. And it was seen as something they did to try and save their own life or save the lives of other Catholics. The way that they did this was sometimes they would only speak half of a sentence, and they would finish it either in their head silently, or they might add a qualification, which means that they would add some words to make it quite ambiguous as to what they mean. They were trying to mislead the people that were listening to them. Henry Garnet was accused of doing this. He was one of the main conspirators of the Gunpowder Plot. And unfortunately, it didn't work for him. His tactic of equivocation failed, and he was executed along with most of the other conspirators of the Gunpowder Plot. And if we link this to Macbeth, you know, both of these men tried to equivocate. They both tried to lie at different times in the play. Macbeth tries to lie, for example, like I talked about in Act 2, Scene 3, when he plays dumb to the death of Duncan. But also Henry Garnet in real life and many other Jesuit Catholics as well. And this just led to people hating them even more, and it does ultimately cost them both their lives. So let's link out to some wider themes that we can talk about in the play. The first one, the most obvious one, is deception or lying. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth regularly lie during this play. For example, quotes like, "Look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it," "False face must hide what false heart doth know," and "Stars, hide your fires, let not light see my black and deep desires." They lie to other characters in the play, but they also try and lie to God, which of course would be extremely sacrilegious at the time, and audiences would dislike them for this. But we also have characters such as the witches equivocate, as I alluded to earlier. For example, when they have the day being foul and fair. The fact that the witches themselves seem to be both male and female could be argued to be a type of equivocation. And just realities often seem quite ambiguous. You're never really sure what's going on sometimes. You know, sometimes as the audience, we feel like we're being told half a truth. Like, is there a dagger? Is there really a dagger? Is there really Banquo's ghost? And so this kind of theme of deception and equivocation could spread out to passages such as those as well. The next theme to link to would be kingship, and this idea of how to treat your king, how to respect your king, particularly with the rules of the divine right of kings and the great chain of being. So if we look back at the lines of Act 2, Scene 3, with the porter and being the porter of Hellgate and accusing this equivocator of treason, we have there a link to treason, which was a crime at the time, which meant going against the sovereign, in this case plotting the murder of a sovereign or even killing the sovereign, which, as we know, happens in this play. Regicide takes place in this play. Another word for treason, by the way, is treachery, if you want to boost your vocab. And then I think there's a really interesting element here that later on in the play, we know that all of Macbeth's thanes leave him and they defect to what is kind of the English and Malcolm side of the war. And I think that the fact that we've got a porter here who does work for Macbeth, a porter literally just means the person that opens and shuts doors, by the way. We've got one of Macbeth's workers already starting to doubt him and accuse him of treason. And I think that's a really early foreshadow that the people that work for Macbeth will lose respect for him and that they will ultimately leave him. Thanks for watching, and if these deep dives interest you and if you like to go into kind of close word analysis on Macbeth, on some of the lesser known quotes, then check out my channel, check out the other videos in this series, Missable Macbeth Moments.